If you have a partner on your journey of trying to conceive, you can pretty much guarantee that this will be the biggest test your relationship is ever going to face. Aside from the grief of infertility and loss, you're navigating how much your plans for the future have changed, the financial burdens, how much intimacy becomes a chore, and the constant worry that your partner isn't holding up his end of the bargain when you are doing everything you can to support your fertility. In today's episode, I am sitting down with fertility therapist Jenna Cavadas, who will explain the best ways to support your relationship at this time in your life so that everything in the meantime can feel easier and you come out of this journey so much stronger. Welcome to Your Journey to Fertility. This is the podcast that blends both science with spirit to give you all the tools you need as you navigate your fertility journey. I'm your host, Jennifer Edmonds, and for the last 15 years, I've been helping women on their journeys to motherhood and beyond. I believe that combining the latest scientific research along with the best energetic and mindset practices will help you to avoid putting your life on hold and bring you closer to your baby. Here each week, you'll learn ways to support your fertility and trust your body so you can stop stressing that you'll never have a baby and finally walk your path to motherhood. This is the Your Journey to Fertility podcast. Hello, welcome back to the podcast. Today, I am speaking with fertility therapist Jenna Cavadas. Jenna knows firsthand the strain that infertility can place on a marriage, and her journey led her to nearly getting a divorce. As a relationship coach for women who are navigating their own fertility challenges, she combines personal experience with therapeutic training to help them maintain strong, loving connections. Through her guidance, women learn to nurture their marriage, overcome relationship stress, and emerge stronger, no matter where their path to parenthood leads. I met Jenna last year when she came in to do a workshop with my fertility students, and I was absolutely blown away by everything that she had to share. And I had to admit that I was a little bit skeptical initially about bringing a therapist on to speak with my students because I found talk therapy not incredibly helpful when I was going through my own journey of infertility. And this is something that I hear over and over again with a lot of people that I speak to in this space. Now, don't get me wrong, there is absolutely a time and a place for talk therapy, and it's incredibly valuable. You know, we need to understand that what we're going through is something that is huge and, to be validated by all the emotions that we're feeling. It's really important to know that we're not alone. We're not overreacting, that this is hard. But at the same time, it gets to a point where you're just talking about everything that's going wrong, all of the frustration that's occurred in your journey and in your life, and you're just rehashing the same upsetting scenarios over and over again. And there is a big reason why talk therapy only gets you so far. It's because there's a huge thing that we're missing here, and that is your body's experience of either a traumatic situation or something really difficult that you've been through. So what I love about Jenna is that she brings these two together, and she explains why talk therapy is important, but then how to go that one step further and really feel this in your body. And that's where we create lasting change. And that is where the most powerful shifts will come through for a lot of people. So I hope that you get a lot out of this conversation, and she shares so many practical tips that you can start implementing like today, straight away, to help your relationship feel more supported. There is so much that we struggle with on this journey. And, personally, there's all of the challenges that I'm sure we all relate to about intimacy becoming such a chore and having to schedule intercourse and all of that fun stuff that comes with struggling to conceive. But also becoming a nag, being that person who's constantly telling your partner, can you not have another drink? Did you take your supplements today? Are you going out for a walk? How come you haven't done any exercise this week? It's just so boring, and it just creates a really hostile environment for an otherwise wonderful and loving relationship. So I hope you get a lot from this conversation. I surely did. And a lot of the things that Jenna shares are things that I implement in my own life today, even though I'm not currently or anymore trying to conceive. So I'm going to stop talking now and hand it over to Jenna. I am so thrilled to be sitting down with you today, Jenna, because the last time we spoke and you came in and did a workshop for my students, there were so many gold nuggets in that conversation and things that even years after my own fertility journey, I was taking away from that conversation and thinking, wow, like this is so eye-opening, and there is so much that we need to be doing on a regular basis to support our relationships when we're trying to conceive. So thank you for being here. Can we start by learning a little bit about you and your journey and what led you to the work that you do?
Absolutely. I'm so happy to be here, Jen. So for me, my husband and I got married about 6 years ago. And less than a year after that, we found out that we were going to have to do fertility treatments to conceive. And it was devastating at first because we did not expect it at all. Neither of us had that on our radar or anything in our family that would indicate that would happen to us. And also throw into the mix that this was during the pandemic. So we were kind of stuck at home and it was hard to go into appointments and feel comfortable. And all of that, on top of lots of other things, created sort of like a wall that came between my husband and I. And we really hit this difficult place in our relationship that really brought the marriage to its knees in a lot of ways. And I'm so grateful to share the journey now because we were able to come through it much stronger. And it led me to wanting to help other women through infertility navigate the challenges that marriages go through on this process because we didn't really have support. And, we were able to come out of it stronger. But I think a lot of people on this journey struggle with that on top of trying to conceive. So that is what led me here. And it brings me great joy to share my story and help other women.
Thank you, Jenna. It isn't something that anyone will ever teach you before you get married. Here's how you navigate your life and your relationship when you're told you can't have children. It's not something that is on anyone's radar, is it? And gosh, it's important because if you have a partner and you're going through this together, that is everything. If you don't have that togetherness, then where do you even go from there? And, your own journey almost led you to a divorce. And I think that there are so many partnerships that really suffer through this in silence. So what was the turning point for you? Where did you say, okay, this isn't working, enough is enough here? And how did you bring back that connection with your partner?
Yeah, I just remember there was one specific moment, I will say, I'll tell this story, which I haven't really shared before, but it just came to mind as you asked the question. And, my husband and I, we decided to just spend a few days apart. So he was not living, at the home for a weekend. And I went outside to mow the lawn. I said, okay, I'm going to put on my big girl pants and mow the lawn. And the lawnmower wouldn't start. And I said, okay, that's okay. I can deal with this, put it away, deal with it later. And I went to start my car to go to the store to figure out what I was going to do with my lawnmower. And my car wouldn't start. And so I said, well, this is not good. But I still held it together at this point. I ended up staying home. I said, you know what? The universe is telling me not to leave my house, not to cut my lawn. I'm just going to do what I can inside my home. And I kid you not, Jen, I went to do laundry and my dryer stopped working. And so at this point, I sat on the floor in my laundry room and I broke down in tears. Tears streaming down my face. I felt so lost in that moment, not just because of the things that were happening, obviously in the house that weren't working, but just, it was the moment where I said, my life is falling apart. It was almost as if the universe brought this to my attention because I said, okay, there's nothing else I can do. And I feel like so many things are broken. I called my husband after telling him we need time apart. I called him, and before I even finished the sentence about what had happened, he said, I'll be right there. And that was the moment where I said, this man who I just said, we have to spend some time apart, is jumping at the chance to come in and do all these things for me. And this was not about the fertility, but it brought everything to light that I wasn't looking at. I really wasn't looking at the value that was in my life. I was looking at what was missing from my life, the lack. And both in the marriage, in him, in the fertility journey, in everything, I was looking through such a negative lens. And this was really such a great opportunity for me to stop and ask myself, what lens did I want to be looking through? Is this how I want to live my life? And so that was the turning point where I said, I have to do something here for myself to help me see things through a different lens in every regard. That was really one of the biggest turning points I can recall.
It's a beautiful story, and I can see the emotion in your face and hear it in your voice as you recount that now.
Yeah.
Gosh, this journey just takes a lot from you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
One of the things that I experienced throughout my own journey of trying to conceive, and I have a great husband. He's amazing, and it was always he was willing to do anything. But I hear this so much from my students as well. They get to this point where I'm taking all the supplements, I'm making the appointments, I'm eating right, I'm quitting drinking, I'm doing all of the things, and you aren't. You're not taking your supplements. You're going out drinking with your friends on the weekend, and you're staying up late, and you're watching TV. And how do we get our relationship onto the same page when we're trying to conceive? It's such a hard one without feeling like I'm a nag. I'm just constantly berating you about this. And no one wants to feel like they're totally nagged at every day, right? So where do you even start with that?
Yeah. So, I mean, just this is really good coming off of the story I told. I think one of the things that I didn't want to do when I started transforming my marriage, because I didn't think I grew up in a home where you were just expected to do things and gratitude was not a thing. You didn't need someone to tell you, thank you for doing X, because it was what was expected of you. But when I had this, day where everything broke in my house and I asked myself, what lens do I want to look through? What I found was that when I started to look for the things to be grateful for, more things came to me to be grateful for. So I felt exactly the same way, where I felt like my husband wasn't, following all of the things, but there were things he was doing that I said, I can take the opportunity to thank him for the things he is doing. That's going to make him want to do more of the things. Because when I was the nag, it made him want to do less. And so I think that, we often think, well, why should I thank him? He's supposed to be doing those things. He wants a kid too, right? But it doesn't inspire our men to do all the things when we are berating them or, talking to them negatively about all the things they're not doing. So what I did was I found 5 things he was doing. Thank you so much for going to appointments. It makes me feel like you're in it with me. Thank you for taking the supplements. It makes me really feel grateful. All of the things that you're grateful for, the more you speak that into him, the more I think that men come back and want to do more because they see that you see the value in what they're trying to do. And I will say there's one other thing. Whenever I felt like my husband wasn't doing enough, there was something much deeper in me that was going on. There was this pain and this fear that felt so vulnerable that whatever we do has such weight about, like, there's so much weight in terms of whether or not it's going to work. And so really wanting them to take the supplements and quit drinking or stop smoking or all those things, it's really about this fear that every single little thing that we do determines whether or not we get pregnant. And so what I always say to women is, how can we actually access the really vulnerable part of you when it comes to what you're afraid of or what you're angry about that he's not doing? He's still drinking. Well, what is the fear? The fear is that, like, that could contribute to being able to conceive. So how can you express that to him in a way that helps him see your vulnerability rather than it coming across like a criticism and a controlling thing towards him? Because when men feel criticized and men feel controlled, they almost always certainly push back, either directly or indirectly, with what they will or will not do.
Gosh, I relate to that so much. So many nights, my husband would come home and, oh, I'm just going to have one drink. I'll be home at 7:30, that sort of thing. And, 10 o'clock and how many drinks later? And I would just be fuming. And you're right, coming at them with this aggression and berating them doesn't get you anywhere. And I think that was a really, really hard thing for me to get my head around.
Yeah.
So, so many questions.
And I would imagine for you that there was that fear of like, well, this is this could be contributing to why we're not getting pregnant. I imagine that was the case.
Of course, I think that all anger stems from fear. Sadness and anger, there's always fear underneath, isn't there? And that is a really hard thing to navigate. But you're right, it's that acknowledgement of where are these feelings coming from and really getting to the base of those fears is incredibly powerful. How do you, so once you've sort of, acknowledged that, okay, I've got to come at this from a different perspective. I don't need to nag or berate my partner to get him to do the things I want him to do.
Right.
How can you move forward when things come up? So, for example, you get into an argument about something that's come up. How do you unwind that miscommunication and get onto that same page?
Well, I would say that if there's something, so you're talking about in regards to something you want them to be doing and then getting on the same page. So I would say, I think the most important thing is speaking from what is true for you and what you desire. And when men hear things in terms of what we desire, there is, we could go on for hours about the hero gene, but they do have an actual hero gene in them that wants to provide. So I always say to women, what is it you want? And a lot of times women will say, well, I want him to stop drinking. And I say, well, that's not what you want. That's what you want him to stop doing. What you want is for him to have a healthier lifestyle. And so speaking from the place of, I would love us to both have a healthier lifestyle in order to X. When you phrase it in this way, I would love, and then you express what you want without it being about them. I would love us to have a healthier lifestyle versus I would love you to stop drinking. You can see how that actually sounds very different. And for men, it has very different impact on their nervous system. And you know that. I mean, you probably know that with all the work that you do, Jen. So what we want to do is have a conversation and communicate in a way that expresses something that they can do to make you happy, that would make them feel like they're fulfilling your desires. And that is the best way I have found is to really use this phrase, I would love, and then make sure to keep it, what I say to my clients is on your own side of the street, by just talking about what's important to you and not trying to dictate to them. And then having a conversation. I think this sometimes is difficult for women. They'll come back and say something. And if they get defensive, then we get defensive, and then it turns into an argument. And the most important thing is to continue to listen with an open mind and open ears. And if it's so hard to do that, you can just try saying something like, you know what, I hear you and I want you to keep sharing. We're trying to work through this together. And I think just navigating your words can be so impactful in terms of having a successful outcome when you're trying to communicate. So those two things, really being willing to stay on your side of the street when you're expressing something that is important to you. And then also having phrases like, I totally hear you and I want to understand more about what this is like for you, allows them to kind of calm some of their nervous system and know that we are willing to listen, because oftentimes it comes across as it's our way or the highway. And like I said, they often want to run to a different highway.
I so relate to that. One thing that you said last time we spoke really stuck with me. And forgive me if this is not the exact words, but you said in an argument, you can either be right or you can connect, something to that effect. And I notice it even now, if my husband and I have an argument, your words come back to me. But it's so hard to get out of that righteous place of, well, I'm right and he's wrong. And no, he can't talk to me like that. Can you expand a little bit on what I've just repeated, what you said previously, and how we can do that in the moment?
There's a couple of things I would share. The best thing I can say is the quickest way out of that like self-righteous feeling is to actually get really loud and playful about it. And even if it's in your mind, to bring this vision of your 5-year-old self having a tantrum. And because that's really what we're doing, right? We're kind of putting our heels in the ground, and we're going to win. And so creating this vision of yourself, kind of sticking to your guns, even as like I think sometimes it's nice to think of ourselves as a child, because we can have compassion, but then also playing with that need to be so right allows us to release the reins a little bit, I think, in terms of how much we need to control the situation. And what I have found, and that's really hard to do sometimes in the moment if you haven't practiced it for quite some time. But when I do it in my mind and I say, okay, I'm getting into my righteous, really self-righteous brain, and I think about that 5-year-old little girl who has her own things that she comes to the relationship with, there's compassion, and then I can like add a little bit of playfulness to the moment. And what you were mentioning before, you can be right or you can have connection. Sometimes I'll say you can have control or you can have connection. And we always get to choose. As women, it is always our choice in a relationship with any issue that's come up. We can have control or we can have connection. The goal is to choose connection more often than you choose control. It doesn't mean you can never choose control, because sometimes you do need to control a situation, or at least you think you do. But if you're choosing control more than 50% of the time, you're always going to sacrifice connection. And so how do you do that in the moment? I think one of the things that I try to practice is slowing the entire conversation down, because what happens is we get really worked up and we want to be able to say our piece, and then we don't listen to their piece, and then everything goes really fast. So if we can just like take some deep breaths and say, okay, right now, because what happens, obviously, too, with the nervous system is our ego brain gets fired up and responds because it thinks that we're under threat. But if we can say to ourselves, like, I'm not actually being attacked by a lion right now, I'm going to take some deep breaths and decide, do I want control or do I want connection? And the last thing I'll say about it is, it took me a really long time to recognize this, and it sometimes often feels like a burden, but most of the time it feels like an opportunity and like a gift, that we as women control and have the opportunity to set the tone of our relationship, and therefore set the tone of a conversation. So if my husband gets defensive or he gets reactive, or he's like, going from 0 to 60, I can almost always, even if it's after the fact, because sometimes the fight has to happen, but I can almost always look back and say, actually, I was the one who escalated first. And that's really hard to admit, but we often set the tone, and we as women will escalate. And then when they escalate, we get angry that they're escalating. And so if we recognize that we set the tone and we take that time to press pause and take time, ask ourselves, do I want connection or control? Then we can stay as close to like having peace in our body in the conversation, and then, take distance if we need to. But I think that, one thing that I just wanted to hit on with what you were saying is that we do really have so much power to influence the tone of the conversation. And sometimes that feels overwhelming, but men will mirror us. So if we are calm and we stay with peace in our body and we choose connection, they will respond with that back. If we attack and we raise our voice and we get self-righteous, they're going to just mirror that same thing back to us. The $1 million question is, how do we maintain that composure? And it's really just a lot of practice and compassion, I think, for yourself in that moment.
Why is that? Why do women more often set the tone in an argument, and why do men more mirror our reactions rather than the other way around?
That's a great question. I think that what I have found is that women have the feminine energy of women that women provide is we are the beings. We are here to be the beings of the feminine energy. And what I think about that is that we have such a presence about us, just existing, right? I mean, if you're in a room full of women, there is just this energy that you can't describe. But if you're in a room, and not to say men have their own gift, but if you're in a room with all men, I don't feel that same energy. So if you agree with me on that, then that kind of answers the question, I think, because women just have this energy that is electric and magnetizing. And so that, I think, is where the basis of the reflection comes in, because I don't think that men have the same magnetism that allows us or enables us to draw from their energy. They draw from our energy because we are energetic beings. I mean, obviously men are too, but I think that our feminine energy really exudes from us. So I think that for me is how I have seen it play out in my relationship and with other women. And it's interesting when I do work with women, a lot of the conversations that we have are around just how are you being? How are you showing up? Because that can just have so many positive effects on the tone and the interactions that you have with your husband. So I don't know. What do you think about that? What's your thought?
I agree. And as you were speaking, I was just thinking about the relationship between, my parents and their partners and my husband's parents, and even my friends who are my age, their partnerships. And you're right. There is something, I don't really like the phrase that I wear the pants in the relationship. That I don't think that's quite accurate. It doesn't really describe the dynamic, but what you're describing, where the woman has this kind of magnetism about her, and you're right, the male partner kind of more, I don't know, not bends to what she is sort of setting the tone by, but I can see how the tone is more set by a woman than a man in a relationship. Yeah, I'd be really interested, anyone who is listening to this, what their opinions are on that as well.
Yeah. And I think, I saw something on Instagram not too long ago about the phrase happy wife, happy life. And I think that gets like a negative connotation because it's like, oh, I have to appease the woman. And no, it just means that like when the woman is happy and in her best version of herself, she is the heart and soul of the marriage and the home. And how empowering is it that we have that much power? Like when I think of it from that perspective, sometimes it can feel like a burden, like I said, but when it feels like a gift and an opportunity to be the heart and soul of the dynamic in my home, I feel like the most powerful person in the world when I think about it that way.
Agree. Big time agree.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Jenna. Another thing I want to ask you about that comes up a lot is this decision of when to either start fertility treatments. You might have got to a point where things aren't working. Maybe you have an unexplained diagnosis and it's like, well, nothing is working, so we might as well go and try this next step. Or on the flip side, you've been going through treatments that haven't been successful and one partner is ready to stop and the other isn't. How do you navigate those kind of challenges?
So I think that it comes back a little bit to what we were talking about before as well, and being able to articulate what it is that is really on your heart and what you want, being able to know where your desires are and also where your fears are. And anyone who's listening, the phrases that I'm using that I think are really good for people to use just like as a standalone for creating the conversations, they can find at threeskills.org. And I can talk a little bit more about that. But the phrase I would love is a great place to start when you're trying to express what you want or desire. Because what so often happens, I think, in these conversations is the fear comes in of if my partner wants to stop and I don't, that might mean I have to decide if this relationship is going to work, or I might have to decide if I never want to have children or if I'm willing to do XYZ. And so we start to get in that brain, the fear brain, and then our fears, if we don't want those things to come true, then make us say things out of that fear to try to convince the person or manipulate the person to do what we want them to do. And so that's never really a great way to have a conversation. And like I said before, men will sometimes put their back up or reject or say no to something that they actually don't want to say no to, but our energy and our words make us repellent. And so this phrase, I would say if like what I'm thinking about is if, a partner wants to stop and the other one doesn't, just honoring for yourself, like I would love a baby. And something as simple as making that sentence and then leaving it there, right? We often think we have to go on and on and on about why and why we think this is right and why our partner should agree and all these things, but that doesn't actually help us create connection. It doesn't actually help us create an opportunity for conversation. And so I often will tell my clients, we have to understand what your true desire is, which for a lot of clients obviously is to have a baby. And then we have to understand what your fear is and how can you express your fears in a way that's vulnerable, that is still on your side of the street, like I mentioned earlier. So these two pieces are so critical. And as I said before too, a lot of women are really clear on what they don't want. They're not always very clear on what they do want. I mean, a lot of them obviously on this journey want a baby. Sometimes they've figured out what lengths they're willing to go. Sometimes they haven't. And so sometimes the fear of their partner not being on board makes them react in ways that doesn't allow conversation to happen. And so I would say the biggest things are understanding your desires and really flushing them out, what it looks like for you. And then also understanding the fears that you have and being able to speak them vulnerably. But as I said, I love the statement, I would love, and being able to reflect that to your partner and then being able to hear them and express that you've heard them. And sometimes conversations, often I tell my clients, shorter is better in the beginning when you're having a really tough conversation as well, to not put so much weight on having to make a big decision in a 20-minute conversation, or we have to stay up all night and decide how this is going to play out. So giving yourself compassion and grace as well in the conversation.
Thank you for sharing that. All right, big question that comes up pretty much with everyone that goes through this journey, I'm sure we can all relate to, is this is the least sexy process in the world, isn't it? The process of trying for a baby when things aren't working. How can we make this fun again? And I know you've got some beautiful examples of how you did this in your own relationship, but how can we not treat this as a chore and just something that we need to put into our calendar and get over and done with?
Right. And I think that the first thing I want to do is just honor that this is probably one of the hardest, shittiest parts of the process, and feeling like it takes the fun and the joy and the spontaneity out of trying to have a baby. You spend so much of your life learning how not to get pregnant, and then we want to get pregnant and we can't, and it does sometimes strip away the passion that we have for our partners, and feeling sexy sometimes doesn't come as easily when we're on this journey and wanting to do all of the things. And so what I find with a lot of clients is we get very wrapped up as women because we're the host. We get so wrapped up in figuring out how to do everything in our power to get pregnant. And in that process, I think what happens, Jen, is that women start to lose themselves. They lose a piece of themselves. They lose the piece of themselves. And sometimes you can't get that back because you're forever changed by infertility. But I think that what happens is sometimes we get so wrapped up in it. We put so much pressure on ourselves. We stop doing all the things that make us feel alive. for me, I loved exercise, and sometimes I would get obsessive about whether or not I was doing it too much or too little or needed to change this or that. I loved dancing, but I think so much of the joy that I naturally held as a woman, all the things that I found so much happiness in, I just stopped doing. Not only because of the fertility piece, but it was just so exhausting to go through that process. And so what I will say is, as hard as it is, and as hard as it is for me to give this as advice, it's one of the best pieces of advice I can give for this, is to be really particular about spending time on self-care. That when you stop and you say to yourself, the most important thing is me being happy, me having time for myself, me still finding joy in the things that brought me joy, is powerful. And it sounds simple, and it sounds like not really it might sound like not a great answer for this question. But when I went out and did the things that brought me joy, it made me remember who I was. It made me step back into my feminine power. It made me step back into my feminine energy. And so doing more of those things that brought me joy allowed me to take deep breaths and remember to enjoy my partner. So, I would go out by myself, on a Sunday. I remember this very vividly. I love dancing, and I would go to salsa classes on Sunday, and it allowed me to come back with this energy that was what we would have had in the beginning, right? This like, I just can't wait to have you kind of energy. And I would, for that moment, I would be able to forget that we were trying to have a baby. And it just became about loving myself, giving myself permission to have joy and happiness in the things that brought me joy and happiness, and allowing that to create the energy that made me feel magnetic, made me feel sexy, even if it was just for an hour. So I really think that, as simple as it is, I think self-care can be huge.
I love that answer so much. I recorded a podcast episode a few weeks ago about self-care and how I approached it when I was struggling to conceive, from this mindset of, okay, well, I'm going to go and do things for myself. I'm going to do the massage. I'm going to take my time because it's going to get me pregnant. Mm-hmm. And that mindset of, well, I've given you this body. You've got your time to relax. Now do what I want you to do. Mm-hmm. And I think that approaching self-care from that kind of negotiating energy is absolutely not how it works. And you should go and do these things that you love and enjoy and that make you happy because you love and enjoy them and they make you happy. And that is the whole equation. So thank you for sharing that. I think that's not really where most therapists would go answering that question. Let's try and, I don't know, bring more play into things and set the mood rather than just, but you're absolutely right. That underlying energy is still going to be there if you haven't come back to yourself. So thank you. I love that answer so much. One of the other things that I really like about the way that you approach therapy is that you're not just about talk therapy. You really are about embodying a lot of the things that we've spoken about today. And I felt this deeply on my own journey, and I see it over and over again. I have students that come to me and they say, I've been going to a therapist or a psychologist, and, I've been seeing the counselor at my clinic, and I just feel more miserable after talking about my problems for an hour. Can you explain a little bit how just talk therapy on its own isn't always helpful, and how bringing this sense of embodiment and actually feeling some of these things in your body makes much more of a difference?
Oh, I love this question so much.
Me too.
I find that talk therapy, especially if you're going through infertility, can be really counterproductive at times, because especially if you're working with someone who really is not in the space or hasn't been through the journey. And I think it can actually have, like I said, counterproductive results at times. And what I think I have, because as a therapist myself who really practices coaching, I believe that the body has the intelligence that the mind does not. And so when we step into our bodies and we get really clear, we learn how to listen to our bodies. This is the example I give people. Babies know how to move their bodies, and they sense something with their bodies without having words. They cannot put words to anything, but they know intuitively with their bodies how to make sense of their world. And so we're actually given the gift of being able to have intelligence that comes from our body that we learn how to not listen to once we become able to use words. And so the more often you are in your head about something, the more often you are suppressing some of the body's natural ability to provide a lot of the answers. So I have a lot of activities and exercises that I do with clients that actually have them step into their body. We get up and we move to release or understand something. And what I love about your question is there is so much limitation to just talk therapy, especially if you have a desired outcome or something you want to move towards. Because just talking has some benefits, but it doesn't always move you towards your goal. And can keep you stuck. And that was what happened for me. I was in talk therapy as a therapist, was in talk therapy for so long. And I felt like I just kept recycling all of the same conversations to try to make sense of my past and figure out why I was the way I was in the present. But I wasn't really moving closer to my goal. And so I think both body intelligence practices, like the ones you teach and some of the things I do with clients, along with the coaching model to move you towards a goal, especially during infertility, can be so empowering. And so, I hope that's answering the question to help people listening, because I really do believe that there are so many benefits to work that will feel a little bit maybe awkward, but that once you try it out, you will start to feel a lot more intelligent about what it is you desire and how to get there when you spend some time working through body.
I love that answer so much, Jenna. Thank you. I wish I had learnt this stuff so much before I did. And it is my wish that we can teach others who are still struggling on their own journeys that there is just so much more that you are capable of. And there are so many more ways that you can support yourself in this journey, from as opposed to just this very Western medicalized system of let's do talk therapy, let's do fertility treatments. And yes, there is so much value in all of those, but there's so much more. So I really appreciate you sharing all of this today. You're amazing. If people want to learn more about you, Jenna, or work with you, what is the best way to do that?
So a lot of the skills, the strategies and phrases that I talked about are actually very easily accessible through a Marriage Thrive guide that I created for women, because what I found was that women really wanted some tangible things that they could do instantly to feel like they were having success in conversations. A lot of people don't want to sit here for hours and hours or weeks and weeks to learn, and just having some quick wins I think is so valuable in this process, especially if you're having trouble with your partner. So if you want some quick wins, ways to communicate with your partner that will allow the conversation to go more smoothly, to feel more successful, you can definitely check out that guide. You can go to 3skills.org. That's the number 3 skills, skills.org, and download that. And anyone who wants to work with me directly, if you'd rather just get to the work because you're so excited, you can find me on Instagram at Jenna Cavadas and DM me, and I'm happy to get you a free consultation just to see where you're at in the process. I love to hear where people are and where they want to go. We talk about how we can get you there and what's standing in the way of getting where you want to go. But definitely, I would say 3skills.org is a perfect place to start for people who want some quick wins today.
Thank you for that, Jenna. Before we finish up, is there any last few words that you want to leave people with that they should know about this journey that maybe they haven't considered?
What comes to mind, Jen, is actually an exercise I did when I did start getting into the work that we didn't talk about. So I'm glad you asked that question. When I really started shifting my relationship, the first thing I did was I created a vision statement of, I think it was maybe 5 years into the future. I can't remember. And I wrote very vividly this picture in my mind of where I was with my husband, with the baby we were hoping to have, and what was happening on that day. And I created, it was so detailed. It was like watching a movie scene. And I spent every night before bed reading that vision statement and bringing it to my mind's eye. And I think what can happen so easily on this journey is we get discouraged, we hear bad news, and then we go down the rabbit hole of all of the things that could go poorly, and we start to lose sight of the vision. And the most important thing is to keep that vision so close to your heart that you can create it in your mind in an instant. And I really do believe that what we put out into the universe has an effect on what comes back to us. And so that vision, creating that vision and creating a practice around how you create space for it on a daily basis in your mind, I think can be so, so powerful. So that's the last thing I would offer to anyone listening.
And what a beautiful way to finish, Jenna. Thank you so much for everything that you've shared today. And I just appreciate all of your wisdom and your time.
Thank you so much, Jen. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you again for being here today. All of Jenna's links are below. And if you want to get started with her tips as to how you can start supporting your own relationship today, really practical step-by-step tips that she's got, please download her free guide. And if you have any questions about Jenna's work, you can reach out to her on Instagram. And remember, you can always leave me a question via my voice note software. So you can find the link to that in the show notes there as well. I love hearing your voice notes. I'm such a language person. It's always wonderful to hear your voices. So now on the next episode of the podcast, we are talking about how to actually manifest what you want when you are trying to conceive. There is so much that we can say about this, and there are so many things that you see online around social media about manifesting, and we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of what really works and what doesn't. So I can't wait to have you back here for that episode next week. But until then, I am sending you all my wishes as you continue your own journey to fertility. The most common thing I hear from students who are on their fertility journey is that the stress of trying to conceive has taken over their life. Your days end up being filled with endless appointments, navigating pregnancy announcements. You're trying to eat right, take all your supplements, and it is all you think about from the moment you wake up. I designed the Element Fertility Yoga course to support your body, your mind, and your mental health in 3 important ways: to synchronize your hormones, increase circulation and blood flow, and to help regulate your nervous system. But on top of this, the greatest gift that you can give yourself throughout this journey is a sense of peace, to help you calm your mind and just make this process feel easier. Every single one of my students tell me that this is the first thing they notice after starting a yoga, meditation, and breathwork practice. But on top of this, you have the amazing benefit of actually supporting and increasing your fertility. Studies have shown that those participating in mind-body programs as they're trying to conceive have success rates 3 times greater than those who don't. The course I've designed walks you through natural conception as well as fertility treatments and IVF cycles. And the best part is you can work through it at your own pace in the comfort of your home. The practices start from just 10 minutes per day. To learn more, visit elementpilatesyoga.com or see the link in the show notes.